Okay.
You think of something being futile or empty or worthless. Do you think this changes throughout, or?
Well, this is what I'm certain. It's not a vanity like your bathroom vanity. I think that all of those words that you used, empty, worthless, what else could we say synonym-wise for the term vanity? Futile is a good word. He also characterizes, I think, it's a parallel idea when he talks about striving after the wind or striving for the wind, trying to chase down and lay hold of the wind. You can't grab the wind. That's a futile exercise. It's a waste of energy and time. You're never going to accomplish anything. And just as you think you're going to accomplish something, what happens? You find that you're right back where you started. And I think that's the sense that vanity is being used here. That, okay, these vain pursuits, and that's what's being defined here, is vain pursuits of life. These vain pursuits are not necessarily vain at any point in time. They may bear some reward short term. People that work hard generally have certain things that they need in life, and they can enjoy the reward of that. But in the end, and that's what the subject of chapter 5 is, it doesn't matter how much stuff you accumulate for yourself in material things, it's all gone in. In fact, ultimately what happens to material things? To all material things, to the earth and all of its works. Peter says they're going to be burned up. They're going to just be destroyed. And so, any labor that I put into the amassing of the earth or its works unto myself ultimately is going to be found to be a futile pursuit, because they're going to be destroyed. I'm not going to have anything to show for it in eternity. I'm still going to exist in eternity. The way Jesus talks about this is the contrast of laying up for yourselves treasures on earth as opposed to laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven. How does he contrast those two treasures? Well, on earth, moths can destroy things. Rust can destroy things. Thieves can take things from you. But heavenly treasures are not destroyed by moths or rust, or no one can steal them. And so they're pictured as being something that's lasting, something that can't be taken from you, something that can't be destroyed. He talks about it in other places being imperishable, which simply means what? It doesn't spoil. Everything material eventually will spoil. And so at any given point in time, there may be some benefit that's derived from an aspect of a life like this, but ultimately it's empty because it doesn't last.
Yeah, and I think that we go between the material and the spiritual. And
Right.
the main thing is the spiritual. There's vanity and vain worship. You have worthless.
Right. It's empty. It has no lasting value. And we talked about that Sunday. That you bring that up, I'll go ahead and pull into that. He talks about people that do their righteousness to be seen of men. And he says, I tell you, you have your reward in full, because your Father's not going to reward you for that kind of stuff. So, is there some temporary benefit from working my righteousness on earth in order to be seen of men? Well, if I enjoy the praise of men, then yeah, there's a temporary benefit to it, but how long does the praise of men last? And in fact, we learn in the time that we live in that the praise of men can turn into condemnation from the same men in an instant. The very ones that can sing your praises one day will be, to use common vernacular today, canceling you tomorrow. So, if I'm doing things for their material, immediate benefit, what Jesus is saying is you better enjoy whatever benefit comes your way from it, because ultimately it's going to be nothing. It's going to come to nothing. It's essentially the same thing that the preacher of Ecclesiastes is doing. He's just doing it more methodically, and he's doing it from the perspective of continually talking about, we're going to get into this in just a moment, in the very first verse of chapter 6, he again repeats this language. There is an evil I have seen under the sun. Every time he talks about under the sun, he's talking about on earth. In this material realm that we live in, he's talking about things that he sees in material life. And he's analyzing those things, using wisdom to analyze those things. And he is coming one by one to the conclusion of, well, that isn't useful. Well, that ultimately isn't useful. Well, that's not going to ultimately, and we've seen him already even go through and say that wisdom alone by itself isn't useful. Is wisdom useful to someone? Sure. But is wisdom alone useful in the grand scheme of things? Not if we're talking about earthly wisdom, because that vanishes. Or if we're talking about wisdom that isn't put into practice. Even if we're talking about God's wisdom. If I possess God's wisdom but don't use it, of what good is it to me? And so we have all those things under consideration, but when he talks about, maybe here's some other language that we can use to be synonymous with this idea of vanity as it's being used throughout this book, or vexation. And maybe I just gave one of them away. Look at verse, yeah, I did. I gave one of them away. Verse 17 of chapter 5 that we looked at last week. Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and anger. What is vexation? Okay, frustration. If someone is vexed, it means not just frustration, but also what? Kind of confused, troubled, frustrated in the sense of there's a lack of understanding. And so the vanity of these ways of living involves vexation. Involves me being frustrated because I do this thing and I pursue this, and this is what I think is going to build for me a good life, and all of a sudden that leaves me, and I'm left going, well, what's going on? This isn't right. This isn't fair. And we're going to get into the idea of fairness in chapter 6 here in a moment. Is life fair under the sun? Is life fair? Anybody?
Well, depending on what you say is like fair. But yeah, it's fair, but and in some things it is not fair. Depends on what your subject matter of life.
You're right. And that gets to your question. So is vanity being used in different ways through this book? Not really, but the circumstances under consideration define what he means by vanity. Ultimately, what he's saying is, okay, this as a number one thing in your life, and again, we've talked about that since we first started this study. What he's doing is systematically going through and saying, okay, these are things that people work. These are things that people place as the number one goal of life. Let's look at it. Is this a good goal? People place enjoying life, having fun. And he went through that. So satisfying the pleasures of the flesh. And he says, you know what? Okay, so it can be temporarily fun, and there can be some temporary joy that comes from it and all that kind of stuff, but you know, in the end it's pretty empty. And so that's not satisfying in the sense of what satisfies me in life. And so he says that's vanity and striving after the wind. What else do people do? Well, they grasp for power. And then they get power, and somebody comes along and takes it from them. They don't have power forever. Ask Saddam Hussein about that. Ask Muammar Gaddafi about that. Ask Hitler about that. Eventually, guess what? Vladimir Putin won't have power. Eventually, the United States will not have power. We grab a hold of power. We have it for a while. Individual people can even amass power into themselves. But it's fleeting. And in the end, they lose it. And what do they realize? Well, pursuing power was useless. I had it for a little while, but now it's gone. When is power useful to you? Only while you have it. Before you get it, you think, hey, if I could just get power, then all of my problems would be solved. You know what happens when people actually lay hold of power? They become paranoid in trying to make sure that it's not taken away from them. Go back and read about Saul and how paranoid he was of David. Trying to make sure that there was no challenge to his power. And that's the way people are. He's going through very systematically and saying, okay, you know what? That doesn't ultimately answer what the purpose and meaning of life is. So power, forget that. That's pointless. For that period of time that you have it, can power be useful? Yes. But ultimately you lose it, and then it doesn't help you anymore. And so as a purpose of life, that's a bad purpose of life. And he's continuing to go down these things systematically. He has just dealt with, in chapter 5, the vanity of wealth and honor. And he's going to continue that line in chapter 6. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. What is that phrase, it lies heavy on mankind? What's that mean? Any of you guys watching online, feel free to comment. Hopefully they'll pop up fast enough that I can include it in the discussion. What does it mean that it lies heavy on mankind? It's a burden. We're not talking about something that's light and easy. We're talking about something that makes life difficult. I've seen this evil. It lies heavy on man. It's this burden that he's got to carry. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor. Now, remember in chapter 5, that's what he's talked about. Wealth and honor. And he's determined that wealth and honor in and of themselves are vain. Now we've got a situation where God has allowed for a man to possess wealth and have great possessions and gain honor so that he lacks nothing in all that he desires. How many of you think you would enjoy that life? Everybody respects you. You have everything that you possibly want, and you're wealthy and can continue to get anything that you want. Now listen to what he says. But he does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. So you gain all this stuff that you've striven for, and you don't get the value out of it. Somebody else does. Some stranger. Where's the enjoyment in that? And that happens all the time. Where people benefit from the work of other people. Where people gain from the wealth of other people. Where people are helped by the things that other people do. Schemes that redistribute wealth essentially accomplish that. Go ahead.
Well, that's of course refers back to how hard it is for a rich man to go to heaven, but that doesn't say that a rich man won't go to heaven.
It doesn't.
It's the same thing here. You
That's a good question. How many of us, if we come into this situation where we're allowed wealth and possessions and honor, are going to keep God first? That's a good question. But he's even talking about something that's just unfair. We would call this unfair. This person comes to possess all these things, but he doesn't gain the benefit from them. Somebody else gains the benefit from what he's given. How unfair is that? And listen to what he says. A stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It's a grievous evil. It's not just evil. It's a really particularly nasty kind of evil. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, two things, by the way, that the Bible sets forth as being good in and of themselves, right? How blessed is a man whose quiver is full of them, it speaks of pertaining to his children. When you're blessed with a lot of offspring, that's a blessing, right? You're blessed with a long life. We talk about, he was blessed with a long life. So these are two blessings that we generally think of. A man fathers 100 children and lives many years. By the way, I don't think that the 100 children thing is literal. I think this is kind of hyperbolic. It's kind of a nice, fat, giant, round number that sounds amazing. He fathers 100 children. He lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he has no burial. I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. So, if you have all the things that we think of as being good in life, let's just combine these two things together that he's talking about. So, here's an individual that has wealth, he has possessions, he has honor, he has long life, and he's got a lot of offspring, but he has no joy in any of it. The preacher here says it's better if he were stillborn than to have that long life that takes up all those many years. If you can't enjoy something, of what use is it? That's really what he's getting at here. I say that a stillborn child is better off than he, for it comes in vanity and it goes in darkness. I'm going to stop here for just a second before we go any further, and I'm going to ask the question of everyone who's watching, who is it? What is it? In verses 4 and 5. It comes, it goes, its name, it has not seen, it finds rest. What is it? What do pronouns refer to? The antecedent noun. What's the last thing he talks about in verse 4? Or in verse 3. Nope, it's talking about the stillborn child. The reason that it is used by the translators is because we don't have a gender for the child. We can't say he or she, so we say it. The stillborn child comes in vanity. It's dead when it's born. It goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. It has not seen the sun or known anything. Yet, and listen, this is why it's better. It's why it's better for the stillborn child than the one who has all of this stuff and yet can't enjoy it. Yet it finds rest rather than he. He refers back to the man who fathers 100 children and lives many years, and the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life. If you're going to live through this life and not have anything of value from life, not have anything to show from this life, when it's over and you leave this world, you don't have anything to show for your life. You've stored up maybe riches for yourself on earth, but nothing in heaven. You've got nothing. He says it's better that you were never alive, that you were born dead and you were covered, in darkness, because at least you're resting in peace. But the guy who I'm describing, he has no peace. So we need to think about the substance of what he's dealing with here. When we chase after vain things, when we are pursuing wealth and honor and those things that he has already prescribed and found to be vain, even if we come to possess them, and we come to possess the most blessed life that we can imagine, if there is no value to it, if you can't enjoy it, if your soul isn't satisfied with what's good, if you're not satisfied with the treasures of heaven, he says it's better for someone who's born into this world dead. Who else came to that conclusion? Job, as he was wrestling with his circumstances. And Job, you'll remember, had 10 children, and he had a lot of flocks, and he had a lot of herds, and he had a lot of wealth, and he had a lot of honor and respect for men, and he had all of these things, and then it was all gone. Boom, psh, no joy in it. Now he's got nothing. And then the next stage was he even lost his health. And so he's sitting here in the town dump. He's lost everything. He's covered in boils from his head to his feet. He is sick. He is in misery. He is in pain. And he says, if this is what life's about, then better if I had not been born. It would be better if I were born as a stillborn. A stillborn child has an advantage over me. Why? Because he wasn't enjoying or taking pleasure in any of those things that we think of as being the description of a successful life. Wealth, possessions, honor, children. He had all those things, but then they were gone. And he came to the same conclusion that the writer of Ecclesiastes comes to. You know what? The stillborn has it better than me. He never saw those good things, but he also never lost them. And he never had the misery and the vanity that my life has been. And so,
back in verse 3, when he uses the word has no burial, referring to there then, if all that he's done is all, whatever he had,
right.
whatever he had was all vanity, so nothing going to do him good, it'd be just a wealth of him. Didn't never live, but it's also be not going to do him any good. If he never dies, he still won't live.
Well, you could read that. You could read that way. I think that what it's saying is, what do we do? Why do we bury people? To show them honor. That's why we do it. And you'll recall that one of the things that God did to Ahab's wife, Jezebel. One of the things that he did to Jezebel was to say what? That she was going to die, but she was never going to be buried. Anybody remember what happened to Jezebel? She fell down and trampled by horses till she was unrecognizable, and then she was eaten by dogs. And that is something that God allowed to happen to her body as a show of contempt for her life. It was very, very unacceptable for you to leave your dead above ground. And among the Jews especially, it was very unacceptable. They actually had a time frame, which is why they wanted to get Jesus in the tomb so quickly, because Sabbath was coming up and they couldn't do it on the Sabbath day.
But why did you say we were buried?
I think that in this case, he's gotten to the point now where he has lost his wealth and he's lost his honor and he's lost everything. And in fact, in his life, he's had this long life and he's got all these kids, but they don't even bother to put him in the ground. They don't even bother to show him the respect of a burial. Yeah, why are we buried? We're buried, but people bury their loved ones to show respect and love. That's why they do it. Because, listen, if we just leave them on the ground, what happens to them? Well, that's the same thing. I have no problem with that. I think we do it to show respect and love. Yep. What we don't want to happen is we don't want them to be eaten by critters. We don't want them to be abused. We don't want them to become putrid and rot like roadkill. Yep. Right. That was not an honorable thing to be eaten by the birds. And so we bury to show honor and respect. This is a guy who ultimately has all these things, but when he gets to the end of his life, finally, there's no honor in it. He's not even buried. They don't care. All they want is what? His things. People just want his things. It's like that joke that's gone around on social media recently. You might have seen a meme about it. Someone said, I didn't have enough money to do one of those DNA tests to find out if I had any kinfolks that I didn't know about. But I won the lottery and they all just came out of the woodworks. You don't know who you're kin to until you have a little money, and then they're all there. That's an empty thing. That's an empty feeling as well. When you don't think you can trust anybody, when you think that everybody's only there for what they can get from you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your answer, Mike.
Yep.
I mean, it's not just critical.
Oh, I understand.
I think that helps a lot in understanding the very fact that you say honor and respect.
And there is no honor and respect in that kind of a life. It ends vain. It's empty. It's pointless. And he goes on to say, listen, even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to one place? Even if you live for 2,000 years, if all that happens is we die, what has that 2,000-year life done for me? Did Methuselah really have an advantage over any of us? Let's just be real clear about this. How long can we expect to live? The Bible says 70, or if you're due to strength, 80. Now, do some people live longer than that? Yes. Do some people live not as long as that? That is a general average, which is a fair general average. You might see 100. If you're really, really on the extreme end of the spectrum, you might see 110. Those are really far and few between. You're talking about the 0.0001% when you get to those extremes. Methuselah, how long did he live? 962 years, I think it was. Did he have an advantage over us because he lived 962 years and we're only going to get 80? And what he's saying is, looking at life from this perspective, seeing how people live it from this way, you can live 2,000 years. What advantage do you have? If this is the kind of life you're doing, if you're pursuing wealth and honor and those things, you can live 2,000 years, what happens? You eventually die. That happens to everyone. We all go to the same place. We all go to the grave. And so if we are pursuing vain things like this that do not satisfy, Even if we live 2,000 years, we eventually get to a point that we realize what? This is striving after wind. This is pointless. And in fact, it's kind of interesting to me. I've known several people who have had very long lives. In fact, I've lost 2 friends in the last 12 months. One of them in the last 3 months, who lived into their 90s. You know, both of those men were ready to go. They saw no purpose in continuing here. Their spouses were gone. Their children were grown. Their grandchildren were grown. They couldn't do the things that they once did. Their strength had left them. Life was becoming more of a burden. And they were just like, I don't know why I'm still here. They had gotten to the point where they realized, you know what? Living to be 90, big deal. Living to be 2,000, big deal. If this is the life, and this is what we have from it, and this is what life's about, honor doesn't last, wealth doesn't last, none of these things bring ultimate satisfaction. All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. Figurative language, we work for our food, but what happens tomorrow? We have to work again for more food. And then the day after that, we have to work again for more food. And then the day after that, we have to work again for more food. Our appetite is never satisfied when we're talking about physical appetites. Our needs never go away. For what advantage has the wise man over the fool? When you look at this kind of a life, it doesn't even matter whether you're wise or foolish. It's the same life. What does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than wandering of the appetite. This also is vanity and striving after wind. Whatever has come to be has already been named. It is known what man is, that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity. And what is the advantage to man? For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? You're going to die. What's going to happen after you die? What's going to happen to your stuff? Even if you leave a will and you say, this is what I want to happen to my stuff, can you be sure that that's what happens to it? Do you have any control over it? You don't take it with you. Who uses it? Do they respect it? Do they respect you? Do they still honor you? I mean, when you get down to the end of this kind of a life, that's what you have. You pass that life like a shadow, even if it's 2,000 years long. It just goes by and it's gone. Who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? What's going to go on the earth after you die? We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. People trying and striving to change the world. And he found that was vain, that was pointless. Why? Because you die and they forget about you. And that week we used Joseph as an example, right? He delivered the entire nation of Egypt and all of his family and a lot of other people from a famine. By making good choices and listening to God and using that information to help people. And then Joseph died, and there arose a generation that what? Knew not Joseph. And what happened to Joseph's children? They became slaves. So he had been elevated to being the ruler of Egypt because he had done this great thing. His descendants became slaves in Egypt because he was forgotten, and the great thing was forgotten. I can work and spend my whole life trying to shape the outcome of things on the earth, and then I die, and what happens? I have no idea what happens anymore. I don't even have an influence on it. And by the way, he's just said, let's suppose you live for 2,000 years. Ultimately, that life still has no influence on what goes on the earth after you're gone. So that's vain and striving after the wind. I have to stop. Appreciate everybody's participation, comments, and all those other things. I don't even think I ever put the outline. I mean, there's tonight's outline. That's what we're covering tonight.